lifelong dedication to international law and opposition to aggression and so on, but somehow they've missed his account of what he and the State Department were up to in 1975. The Lewis article is quite typical, not only of the coverage of East Timor, but also of the UN and the Cold War. Well, let me give a little background. In the early post-war planning for the world, the United States had, the State Department and the U.S. generally, had special plans for Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia was to, as George Kennan's policy planning staff in the State Department put it, Southeast Asia must fulfill its main function in providing resources and raw materials for the reconstruction of Europe and Japan. The CIA, in one of its earliest reports, said that we must maintain the colonial economic interests of Western Europe in Southeast Asia. Crucially, Kennan added, we must restore what he called Japan's empire toward the south, that is, the co-prosperity sphere that Japan had tried to construct, to which the United States basically had only one objection. They were leaving us out, but now we would reconstruct it for them, now under U.S. control as part of the global system that the U.S. was organizing and running. And Indonesia was crucially important in this. In December 1948, Kennan called Indonesia the most crucial issue in our struggle with the Kremlin. What's it got to do with the Kremlin? Well, the Kremlin was, that's kind of a code word for neutralism. The threat basically was the threat of neutralism all over the world, in Europe and Japan and so on. Neutralism was regarded by Dean Acheson and Chief of Staff Omar Bradley and others as suicidal, in their words. The fall of Indonesia, Kennan said, would spread the infection to Burma, India, Pakistan, Australia. The same reasoning, incidentally, led to the war in Vietnam. This nationalist infection, it was feared in Vietnam, might spread to Indonesia, ultimately beyond, even to what John Dower, one of the leading Asia historians here, calls the super domino. Well, concerns about Indonesia mounted through the 1950s. It was ruled by Sukarno, an independent nationalist, who tried to balance Indonesian politics between the two major forces there, the army and the PKI, the Communist Party, which was the only mass-based political party. In 1957-58, the CIA, U.S. participated and backed an armed insurrection against Sukarno, which failed. In the early 60s, concerns mounted. Guy Pawker, a government scholar and a study published by Princeton University, urged his contacts in the Indonesian military, I'm quoting, to take full responsibility for their country, strike, sweep their house clean. Another leading foreign policy analyst, Professor William Kintner of University of Pennsylvania, warned that if the PKI is able to maintain its legal existence and Soviet influence continues to grow, the same code word, it is possible that Indonesia may be the first Southeast Asia country to be taken over by a popularly based, legally elected communist government. Therefore, he said, with Western help, free Asian political leaders, that is, the kind who are going to lose if there's an election, together with the military, must not only hold on and manage, but reform and advance while liquidating the enemy's political and guerrilla armies. Pawker then expressed his concern that the groups backed by the United States, in his words, would probably lack the ruthlessness that made it possible for the Nazis to suppress the Communist Party of Germany. He said these right-wing and military elements that we support, the free leaders, are weaker than the Nazis, not only in numbers and in mass support, but also in unity, discipline, and leadership. Well, Pawker's pessimism proved unfounded. In October 1965, the pro-American General Suharto took charge, and he launched a bloodbath of which the Nazis would have been proud. Hundreds of thousands of people, mostly landless peasants and plantation workers, were slaughtered within a few months. The public Western reaction to this orgy of bloodshed was relief and pride. The Deputy Undersecretary of State, Alexis Johnson, celebrated what he called the reversal of the communist tide in the great country of Indonesia, an event which he said will probably rank, along with the Vietnamese War, as perhaps the most historic turning point of Asia in this decade. That was in October 1966 when the full toll was known. Secretary of Defense McNamara testified before Congress that U.S. military aid to Indonesia had, in his words, paid dividends and was therefore justified, the major dividends being a huge pile of corpses. In a private communication to the President, McNamara went further. He said that U.S. military assistance to the Indonesian army had encouraged it to move against the PKI when the opportunity was presented, that is, after the Suharto coup. Particularly valuable, he said, was the program bringing Indonesian military personnel to the United States for training at U.S. universities. You'll notice that we've been civilizing them for quite a long time. A congressional report also held that the training and the continued communication with military officers paid enormous dividends, namely this mass slaughter. In November 1966, Freedom House published an advertisement signed by what they called 145 distinguished Americans, including distinguished Harvard professors, which justified the U.S. war in Vietnam for having, as they put it, provided a shield for the sharp reversal of Indonesia's shift towards communism. No reservations expressed about the means that were used. McGeorge Bundy, who moved from Harvard dean on to national security advisor, years later in the mid-'80s, observed that it would have been wise for the United States to have stopped, or at least reduced, the Vietnam War in 1965 when, as he put it, a new anti-communist government took power in Indonesia and destroyed the Communist Party, incidentally slaughtering some 700,000 people or so. There was no condemnation of the slaughter on the floor of Congress. No major U.S. relief agency offered aid. The World Bank quickly restored Indonesia to favor. Western governments and corporations followed suit, which was a reflection of their pleasure at the course of events. What about the media? Well, they were pleased, in fact, euphoric. In October 1965, as the slaughter was just getting underway, Times correspondent Max Frankel, who is now editor-in-chief, described the delight of Johnson administration officials over the dramatic new opportunity in Indonesia. The military showed power, so Indonesia can now be saved what had appeared to be an inevitable drift towards a peaceful takeover from within. Peaceful takeover from within is code word. It means democratic politics, the worst conceivable tragedy, of course. U.S. officials, he said, believe the army will cripple and perhaps destroy the communists as a significant political force, leading to the elimination of communist influences at all levels of Indonesian society. So we don't have to worry about this peaceful takeover from within. Consequently, he said, there is now hope where only 2 weeks ago there was despair. Well, that was October 65. As the results started coming in, the joy mounted. In mid-1966, well after the facts were known, U.S. News and World Report had a long and enthusiastic story with the headline, Indonesia, Hope Where There Once Was None. Time magazine had a cover story which celebrated the West's best news for years in Asia. The heading was Vengeance with a Smile, had 5 full pages of text and 6 more of pictures devoted to what it called the boiling bloodbath that almost unnoticed took 400,000 lives. It then informed us that the new army regime which carried this out is scrupulously constitutional, based on law and not mere power. The authority was General Suharto, its quietly determined leader with his almost innocent face. The New York Times featured a column headed A Gleam of Light in Asia. It's by its leading political commentator, the highly revered James Reston, who said that we should not let the bad news in Vietnam displace the more hopeful developments in Asia, primary among them being what he called the savage transformation of Indonesia from a pro-Chinese policy under Sukarno to a defiantly anti-communist policy under General Suharto. He said, Washington is being careful not to claim any credit for this change in one of the most richest countries in the world, but this does not mean that Washington had nothing to do with it. He said, it is doubtful that the coup would ever have been attempted without the American show of strength in Vietnam, or been sustained without the clandestine aid it received indirectly from here. So we should be very proud that our government contributed to the greatest slaughter since the days of Hitler and Stalin. Editorial reaction generally was the same. Suharto went on to compile one of the worst human rights records in the world at home, along with slaughter in West Papua, the invasion and slaughter in East Timor, and so on.